Sloane Harrison's red dress snaked through guests at Manhattan's Plaza Hotel like a living flame, drawing admiring glances and curious whispers. His hands, protected by black satin gloves, gently clasped the small hands of Hunter and Harper, who walked beside him with the same natural elegance they inherited from their privileged genes. "Mommy, why is everyone looking at us?" Harper whispered, her cobalt blue eyes, identical to those of the father she never knew, shining with childlike curiosity. Sloane took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. 5 years of meticulous planning culminated in this night. Westwick Industries' annual benefit gala has always been the most prestigious event on New York's corporate calendar, and it chose this particular moment for its grand return. "Because you are the most beautiful children at this party," he replied with a practiced smile as his heart hammered against his ribs. Sloane's transformation in recent years has been calculated with the precision of a military strategist. The naive 23-year-old who had been kicked out of the Westwick mansion in Beverly Hills during that storm had metamorphosed into a respected executive. His artificial intelligence startup, Nova Genesis, was quickly becoming a real threat to Westwick Industries' monopoly in the advanced technology sector. The plaza's lobby sparkled with crystals and white flowers, while the cream of New York society walked around with glasses of champagne and practiced smiles. Sloane led the twins through the main hall, aware that her presence had already been noticed by the Westwick Industries executives who recognized her. Hunter, always more observant than his sister, shook his mother's hand. "That man over there looks like me, Mum," he commented innocently, pointing to a huge portrait of Maxwell Westwick that dominated one of the walls. Sloane felt her stomach drop. The similarities between Maxwell and his sons were undeniable. The same blue-black hair, the same aristocratic profile, the same piercing eyes that seemed to see into people's souls. "A lot of people look like each other, dear," she replied softly, guiding the children away from the portrait. A few meters away, Maxwell Westwick was talking to investors, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. At 38, he had become even more imposing than Sloane remembered. Time has only accentuated his magnetic presence, and the power emanating from him was almost palpable. "Miss Harrison," a familiar voice greeted her. It was Richard Morrison, Chief Financial Officer of Westwick Industries, and one of the few who knew the truth about his departure years ago. "What a surprise. Interesting to see you here." "Richard," Sloane replied with a cold smile. "The years have been kind to you." His eyes moved to the children, and Sloane realized the exact moment realization hit him. "These are my children," she added, her tone making it clear that there would be no further explanation. The hubbub in the room suddenly died down, and Sloane knew without needing to look that Maxwell had finally noticed her. The air between them has always had this electric quality, this ability to make time slow until it almost stops. Sloane. His voice, deep and controlled, still had the power to make her tremble inside. Sloane slowly turned around, positioning herself protectively in front of the twins. "Maxwell," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "How long?" His eyes, so familiar on his children's little faces, swept over her figure before focusing on the children partially hidden behind her. The shock on his face was momentary, but unmistakable. "Interesting, your choice of event to reappear," he commented, his voice filled with restrained tension. "I thought it was appropriate, considering Nova Genesis just entered into a partnership with its biggest competitor," Sloane replied, with calculated sweetness. Maxwell took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the twins who were now watching him with barely concealed curiosity. "And who are your companions?" Harper, always the more outgoing one, followed Sloane. "I'm Harper, and this is my brother Hunter. We're 5 years old," she announced proudly. Maxwell's face visibly paled, his eyes widening as he did the mental calculation. The silence that followed was deafening, charged with 5 years of secrets and unspoken accusations. 5 years, he repeated slowly, his gaze returning to Sloane with an intensity that could melt steel. "We need to talk, in private." "There's nothing for us to talk about, Maxwell," Sloane replied, even though she knew it was a lie. There were 5 years of unspoken truths between them. 5 years of pain and anger and regret. "I disagree," he said, his voice low but charged with authority. "And I think you know exactly why." Sloane felt the weight of dozens of eyes on them, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Her revenge plan was beginning to materialize, but suddenly she was no longer sure if she was prepared for the consequences that would follow. Maxwell led Sloane to his private office at the Plaza Hotel, an elegant space overlooking Central Park. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken accusations. Before leaving the main hall, Sloane had entrusted the twins to the care of her personal assistant, Rachel, who had known them since birth. 5 years, Sloane. Maxwell broke the silence, his voice controlled but trembling slightly at the edges. 5 years and 2 kids who are obviously my kids. How could you? Sloane stood tall, her red dress reflecting the soft light of the office. How could I? You kicked me out that night, Maxwell. You didn't even give me a chance to explain. Explain what? The photos were quite clear, he replied, running a hand through his dark hair in a familiar gesture of frustration. You, in the arms of James Morrison, my biggest commercial rival at the time. Those photos were doctored and you know it, Sloane replied, keeping her voice steady despite the emotional storm inside her. But you were so blinded by your pride, so convinced of your own version of the truth, that you didn't even bother to investigate. Maxwell approached the window, watching the lights of Manhattan twinkle like earthly stars. I hired investigators. They confirmed everything. Your investigators? Sloane laughed humorlessly. The same ones that were bought by Victoria to destroy our marriage. The name of his former vice president made Maxwell turn around sharply. What does Victoria have to do with this? Everything, Sloane replied, finally revealing one of the trump cards she had held onto for so long. She orchestrated this entire charade because she wanted her place, not just in the company but in your life. The photos, the false reports, everything was carefully planned. That's absurd, Maxwell protested, but there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes. Really? Why do you think she mysteriously disappeared after I left? Why did Westwick Industries lose that billion-dollar contract with the Japanese right after? Sloane approached, her heels echoing on the marble floor. I have all the proof now, Maxwell. Every email, every bank transfer, every little detail of her plan. Maxwell staggered slightly, supporting himself on his mahogany desk. Why didn't you tell me this before? Why wait 5 years? Say, you threw me out of the house on a stormy night. I was 2 months pregnant and you didn't even let me open my mouth. Sloane's composure began to crack. Do you know what it's like to go through a high-risk pregnancy alone, giving birth to twins without anyone by your side other than strange nurses? The words hit Maxwell like physical blows. He approached her, his cobalt blue eyes, the same ones Hunter and Harper inherited, searching hers. You should have told me about the pregnancy. For what? For you to doubt that they were your children too? Sloane felt tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. No, Maxwell. You made your choice that night. I just respected your decision and moved on. Got forward building a company to compete with mine, he observed, a hint of involuntary admiration in his voice. New Genesis is much more than revenge, Sloane replied. It's my legacy to our children, something I built from scratch, without using the Westwick name or his contacts. Maxwell moved even closer, his familiar scent making Sloane's heart race treacherously. Now what? What's your plan? Use children as pawns in this game of corporate chess? No, Sloane replied with surprising sincerity. They ask about their father, Maxwell. They're growing up. They deserve to know the truth regardless of what happened between us. A heavy silence fell over the office. Outside, the city continued its frenetic pace, oblivious to the drama unfolding within those walls. I want to meet them, Maxwell finally said, his voice softer than before. Properly. As a father. It's not that simple, Sloane warned. They have their own life, their own routine. You can't just show up and expect everything to fall into place perfectly. I know, he agreed, running a hand over his face with obvious tiredness. "But they're my children, Sloane. 5 years. 5 years I can never get back." The vulnerability in his voice made something inside Sloane twist painfully. This was not the confrontation she had planned for so long. The reality was proving to be much more complex than his revenge fantasy. "We can start slow," she found herself saying, surprising herself. "They're in New York for 2 weeks. Maybe we can arrange some controlled meetings." Maxwell nodded slowly, as if afraid that a sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment of understanding. "What about us? There's a lot we need to resolve." "One step at a time," Sloane replied, walking toward the door. "The children first, the rest will have to wait." As she reached for the doorknob, Maxwell's voice stopped her. "Sloane, I'm sorry, about that night, for not listening." She didn't turn around, but her entire body shook with the weight of those words. "I'm sorry too, Maxwell, for all of us." Leaving the office, Sloane realized that her meticulous plan for revenge was falling apart, not because of Maxwell's strength, but because of the simple, devastating truth that still existed between them. Some feelings are too strong to be buried, no matter how much time passes. The first light of morning filtered through the penthouse of the Four Seasons, where Sloane watched Hunter and Harper sleeping peacefully. The previous night at the gala had been emotionally exhausting, but the children, oblivious to the storm brewing around them, had fallen asleep telling stories about the man in the portrait who looked like Hunter. His phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Maxwell is in the lobby. Should I send him up?" Sloane felt her heart skip a beat. She knew he would come. Maxwell Westwick was never a man to wait when deciding something. After responding affirmatively, she silently closed the children's bedroom door and headed to the suite's living room. Minutes later, Maxwell emerged from the private elevator, looking impeccable in a navy blue suit that highlighted his eyes. He carried a leather briefcase, and his expression wavered between determination and uncertainty. "Good morning, Sloane," he said softly, aware of the sleeping children. "I brought some documents that we need to discuss." "Documents?" Sloane arched an eyebrow, gesturing for him to sit. "Paternity acknowledgement, among others," Maxwell explained, placing the folder on the coffee table. "I spent the night with my lawyers." "Of course it passed," Sloane murmured, pouring coffee for them both. "Always the businessman, aren't you, Maxwell? Always trying to control every variable." "It's not about control," he replied, accepting the cup. "It's about doing the right thing. They are Westwicks, Sloane. They deserve all the support and protection that name can provide." "They have all the support they need," Sloane replied, taking a seat in the opposite chair. "I built a life for the three of us, without needing the Westwick empire." "And he did an impressive job," Maxwell agreed, surprising her. "Nova Genesis is one of Silicon Valley's most promising startups, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm their father." A noise from the children's room interrupted the conversation. Harper appeared in the doorway, her dark hair disheveled, and her eyes, so like her father's, wide with surprise at the sight of Maxwell. "Mommy?" she called hesitantly. "Come here, sweetie." Sloane held out her hand. Harper approached cautiously, studying Maxwell curiously. "You are the man in the portrait," she declared with the brutal honesty characteristic of children. Maxwell swallowed, visibly moved. "Yes, it's me. My name is Maxwell. Why do you look so much like Hunter?" The innocent question made the air thick. Sloane felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't the way he had planned to tell the children, but fate seemed to have other plans. "Harper, honey, why don't you wake up your brother? We have something important to talk about with you two." As Harper ran back to the room, Maxwell stood up, walking to the window. "Are you sure about this? Now?" "They're already asking questions," Sloane replied. "And you said it yourself. It's time to do the right thing." Hunter and Harper returned holding hands, a trait they had developed since they were babies. They sat on the couch between Sloane and Maxwell, their little faces expectant. "Kids," Sloane began, her voice soft but firm, "remember all the times you asked about your father?" The twins nodded in sync. Hunter gave Maxwell a searching look, as if he had already reached his own conclusion. "Maxwell, he's your father," Sloane continued, closely watching her children's reactions. Harper gasped dramatically, while Hunter remained silent, processing the information. Maxwell leaned slightly toward the children, as if he were going to touch them, but stopped himself. "Why were you never with us?" Harper asked Maxwell directly, her small voice carrying a hurt that broke the hearts of every adult present. "Because I didn't know about you guys," Maxwell answered honestly, his voice cracking. "And that was a terrible mistake that I intend to spend the rest of my life trying to right, if you'll give me the chance." Hunter, who until then had remained silent, finally spoke. "Are you going to live with us now?" The innocent question crystallized the complexity of the situation. Sloane and Maxwell exchanged tense glances. "No, honey," Sloane replied gently, "but Maxwell would like to spend time with you, get to know you better, if you want." "Can we go to the zoo?" Harper asked, her childlike ability to adapt to major changes surprising the adults. "Mum said the New York Zoo is the best in the world." "We can go wherever you want," Maxwell replied, a genuine smile lighting up his face for the first time. "The Central Park Zoo is amazing, and then we could get ice cream at Serendipity." The rest of the morning passed in a surreal bubble. Maxwell and the kids talked about school, favorite animals, and all the little things that make up a 5-year-old's universe. Sloane watched the interaction with a mix of mixed emotions: relief that her children were finally meeting their father, fear of what this would mean for the future, and a pang of something she refused to acknowledge when she saw Maxwell with the twins. When the kids went to change for their promised outing, Maxwell turned to Sloane. "You did an amazing job with them." "Thank you," she replied softly. "They are my whole life." "And now they're mine too," he declared with conviction. "I know we have a lot to work out between us, Sloane, but I promise I'll make everything right for them." Sloane nodded, knowing this was just the beginning of a complex journey. Her plan for revenge had turned into something very different from what she had imagined, and she wasn't sure if that scared her or relieved her. The sound of children's laughter echoing through the apartment served as a reminder that sometimes fate has better plans than our own. The Central Park Zoo was buzzing with activity that Saturday afternoon, but Maxwell was barely aware of the other people around him. His eyes were fixed on the twins who were excitedly running from one exhibit to another, their little hands pointing to each animal with infectious enthusiasm. "Look, Dad." The word naturally escaped Harper's lips, causing Maxwell to freeze momentarily. It was the first time she had called him that, and the emotional impact was overwhelming. "Penguins are swimming!" Sloane, who was walking a few steps behind, also noticed the moment. His expression softened when he saw how Maxwell knelt beside Harper, patiently explaining about the different species of penguins. "They're like little scientists," Maxwell commented quietly as he approached Sloane, while the children watched the sea lions in fascination. "Hunter won't stop asking questions about how everything works." "Just like her father," Sloane replied without thinking, immediately regretting it when she saw the intense look Maxwell gave her. "The more time I spend with them, the more I realize everything I've lost," he said, his voice thick with regret. "Your first steps, first words." "Maxwell," Sloane interrupted softly, "we can't change the past. What's important is what we do from now on." Before he could respond, Hunter rushed over. "Dad, did you know that sea lions can stay underwater for up to 20 minutes? How can they hold their breath for so long?" Maxwell smiled, genuinely enchanted by his son's curiosity. As he explained about marine adaptations and evolution, Sloane watched the interaction with a lump in her throat. It was as if the pieces of a long, incomplete puzzle were beginning to fit together, even though the final picture was still uncertain. After the zoo, as promised, they went to Serendipity 3 for the famous frozen hot chocolate. The children sat side by side, sharing the giant dessert while talking excitedly about the animals they had seen. "Mommy said you make robots," Harper commented between spoonfuls, her blue eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Well, about that," Maxwell replied, exchanging an amused look with Sloane. Westwick Industries develops advanced technology, including some types of robots. Like Mom's, Hunter exclaimed. She has a lab full of cool computers at Nova Genesis. Maxwell raised an eyebrow at Sloane. So, have you guys visited the lab yet? Sometimes, she admitted. They inherited our fascination with technology, apparently. Can we visit your lab too? Harper asked Maxwell, her eyes pleading. The innocent request created a moment of tension. Maxwell looked at Sloane, silently asking for permission. Maybe another time, Sloane replied diplomatically. First, we need to organize things better. The children accepted the answer without question, turning their attention to the dessert. Maxwell, however, continued to watch Sloane intensely. When they left the restaurant, the sun was beginning to set over Manhattan, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. Hunter and Harper walked a few steps forward, still energetic despite the long day. They need a father in their lives, Sloane, Maxwell said softly. Not just occasional visits or weekend trips. I know, she replied, watching her children. But we also need to be realistic. You live in Los Angeles, we live in San Francisco. There is the issue of school, of established routines. Then let's sort this out, he insisted. I could move the company's headquarters to San Francisco, or you could consider expanding Nova Genesis to Los Angeles. Sloane stopped walking, staring at him. It's not that simple, Maxwell. We can't just rearrange our lives like pieces on a chessboard. Why not? He approached, lowering his voice. We've already wasted 5 years, Sloane. 5 years we'll never get back. I don't want to waste another day. His familiar scent enveloped her, bringing back memories she fought to keep buried. Things are different now. I'm different. I'm no longer that naive young woman you once knew. No, you're much stronger and more impressive now, Maxwell replied, his eyes boring into hers. And that just makes me... He didn't finish the sentence, interrupted by the excited screams of the twins who had found a street artist making giant soap bubbles. The moment passed, but the tension remained, hovering between them like a heavy cloud. They watched the children playing with the bubbles, their laughter echoing down the sidewalk as dusk settled over the city. I'm going to ask my lawyers to prepare a joint custody proposal, Maxwell finally said, something that is fair and viable for all of us. Sloane nodded slowly. Okay, but let's do this gradually, respecting the children's time to adapt. I agree, he replied, a small smile appearing on his lips. After all, patience has never been my strong suit, but for them, I learn. As they walked back to the hotel, Sloane reflected on how her meticulous plan for revenge had turned into something completely different. Maxwell's presence in the twins' lives was inevitable now, and with it would come changes she could no longer control. What had begun as a power play was quickly becoming a journey of reconciliation, not just between father and sons, but perhaps, though she wasn't ready to admit it yet, between two hearts that had never truly parted. Sloane's office at Nova Genesis's temporary Manhattan branch was buzzing with activity the following Monday. Financial reports, pending contracts, and dozens of urgent emails competed for her attention, but her thoughts kept returning to the weekend with Maxwell and the kids. Miss Harrison. Rachel appeared in the doorway, her expression worried. Victoria Bennett is on line 3. Sloane felt her body stiffen. Victoria. The name still had the power to awaken an icy fury within him. Put it on the line. Sloane, darling, Victoria's honeyed voice sounded over the speakerphone. What a lovely surprise to see you at the gala. You and those adorable kids created quite a buzz. Get to the point, Victoria, Sloane replied, keeping her voice controlled. We both know you don't care about exchanging pleasantries. Very well, Victoria's tone hardened. You're making a mistake exposing these kids now. Maxwell has moved on. Westwick Industries has moved on. Why dwell on the past? Interesting that you bring up the past, Sloane replied, opening a folder on her laptop, especially considering the documents I have about your activities from 5 years ago. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. I don't know what you're talking about. No? The emails to James Morrison about the fabrication of the photos? The bank transfers to private investigators? The attempt to sabotage the Japanese contract? Sloane allowed each word to penetrate like a dagger. I have everything, Victoria. Every dirty little bit of your plan. What do you want? Victoria's voice trembled slightly. Right now, nothing. Consider this a friendly warning. Stay away from my family. After ending the call, Sloane leaned back in her chair, trying to calm her nerves. The confrontation with Victoria left her shaken, bringing up memories that she preferred to keep buried. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maxwell. Emergency Westwick board meeting. Can I send the driver to pick up the kids from school? Rachel mentioned you have late appointments. Sloane hesitated. It was a significant step to allow Maxwell to take on parental responsibilities so early, but Rachel really was right about his busy schedule. Okay, she replied finally, but keep me posted. The afternoon passed in a succession of meetings and conferences, but Sloane couldn't concentrate fully. At 5 p.m., his phone vibrated again, this time with a photo. Maxwell sat between the twins in his private library on the plaza's rooftop, all three of them poring over what looked like a science project. Hunter wanted to know more about electrical circuits, the message said. We're building a little robot. Something inside Sloane twitched when she saw the image. It was simultaneously heartbreaking and comforting to see Maxwell taking on his paternal role so naturally. At 7 p.m., she arrived at the plaza, finding a surprising scene. The room had been transformed into a kind of improvised laboratory, with electronic parts scattered across the coffee table, and the three Westwicks completely absorbed in their project. "Mommy!" Harper exclaimed when he saw her. "Look what we built!" A small, rudimentary-looking but clearly functional robot moved around the table. Maxwell watched proudly as Hunter explained each component to Sloane. "They're brilliant," Maxwell commented quietly, as the children became distracted by the robot. "Hunter has an intuitive understanding of engineering that impressed me." "And Harper has your talent for leadership," Sloane replied. "She naturally took charge of the project." They were silent for a moment, watching their children play. The domesticity of the scene was dangerously comfortable. "Victoria called today," Sloane said abruptly, watching Maxwell stiffen, apparently not happy with the new developments. "She has no right to have an opinion," Maxwell replied, his voice thick with restrained anger. "Actually, I need to tell you something. After you left, I discovered some irregularities in the company's accounts. Victoria was embezzling funds, but when confronted, she disappeared. I never made the connection until now." "There's a lot more you need to know," Sloane sighed. "But not tonight, not in front of them." Maxwell nodded, understanding. "Dinner tomorrow? We can discuss everything properly." Sloane knew she should refuse. Dining alone with Maxwell was dangerous. There was too much history, too much unresolved emotion between them, but there were also truths that needed to be told. "Okay," she agreed, "but just business dinner." Maxwell's smile suggested he didn't quite believe that last part. Sure, just business. When Sloane finally took the kids home that night, her carefully constructed plan seemed further and further away. The revenge she had planned was gradually being replaced by something more complex and frightening, the possibility of reconciliation. Lying in her bed later, going over the day's events, Sloane realized she was in dangerous territory. Because no matter how much she tried to deny it, no matter how much she hid behind revenge plans and old hurts, her heart still recognized the inconvenient truth. She had never truly stopped loving Maxwell Westwick, and that, more than anything else, completely terrified her. Le Bernardin restaurant glowed in soft lighting as Sloane entered, her midnight blue dress contrasting elegantly with her skin. Maxwell was already waiting for her at a discreet table in the back, standing up when he saw her approach. "You look stunning," he commented, as he pulled out his chair. "This is a business dinner, Maxwell," Sloane reminded him, though her heart quickened at the compliment. "Sure," he agreed, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Wine?" After the sommelier poured a bottle of Bordeaux that Maxwell chose, silence fell between them. There was so much to be said that neither of them knew where to start. The kids haven't stopped talking about the robot. Sloane finally broke the ice. Hunter even drew up plans for an improved version. He's a natural, Maxwell replied, his face lighting up as he spoke of his children. Harper, too. She's already thinking about how she could market the project. Definitely our children, Sloane chuckled softly, before her face turned serious. Maxwell, about Victoria. Yes. He placed his wineglass on the table. You mentioned having proof. I want to see everything. Sloane opened her bag and pulled out a flash drive. It's all here. Emails, bank transfers, recordings of conversations. It took me years to collect this information. Maxwell took the device, his expression hardening. Why wait so long to reveal this? At first I was too hurt to think clearly, Sloane admitted. Then, when I started to put the pieces together, I discovered the scheme was bigger than we imagined. Victoria didn't act alone. James Morrison, Maxwell concluded, his jaw twitching. I always suspected there was something wrong with that merger he proposed. They planned everything, Sloane confirmed. The forged photos were just part of the plan. Victoria had been leaking confidential information to Morrison Technologies for months before the incident. The waiter arrived with the main dishes, forcing a pause in the conversation. When they were alone again, Maxwell leaned forward. Why now, Sloane? What's changed? She played with her food for a moment before responding. The children. They deserve to know the truth about their past, about their family, and... She hesitated. Maybe I was tired of carrying this weight alone, too. You've never had to carry anything alone, Maxwell said softly. If I had listened to you that night... But you didn't listen, Sloane interrupted. And I made mistakes, too. I should have fought harder. I should have found a way to make you hear the truth. A heavy silence fell over them, filled with regrets and lost possibilities. We still have time, Maxwell finally said, to fix things, to do things differently. For the children, Sloane specified, though her heart protested the limitation. Not just for them, he replied, his intense eyes meeting hers. Sloane, these last few days with you and the twins have made me realize how much I've missed you, not just as my wife, but as my partner, my equal. Maxwell, she began, but he continued, you've built something impressive with Nova Genesis. You've turned your pain into strength, your anger into motivation. How can you not admire that? Stop, Sloane asked softly. We can't just erase 5 years of hurt and distrust. I'm not asking you to delete anything, he replied. I'm asking us to build something new, something better, this time with the whole truth on the table. Sloane's cell phone vibrated, interrupting the moment. It was Rachel. Hunter has a fever. I already gave him the antipyretic, but he's asking for you. I need to go. Sloane stood up abruptly. Hunter is sick. Maxwell was already on his feet, picking up his coat. I'm going with you. The journey to the hotel was tense, everyone lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, they found Hunter curled up on the couch, with Harper sitting next to him reading a story. Mommy, Hunter called weakly, his blue eyes bright with fever. Father. The word made Maxwell's heart sink. He knelt down beside his son, placing his hand on his forehead. We're here, champ. Sloane watched as Maxwell carefully examined Hunter, his soft voice calming the boy. It was a scene she never imagined she would witness, the powerful Maxwell Westwick completely dedicated to comforting his sick son. The fever is breaking, he reported after a few minutes, but we must keep him monitored overnight. Can you stay, Dad? Harper asked sleepily, still holding her book. Maxwell looked at Sloane, silently asking for permission. She hesitated only for a moment before nodding. As the children finally fell asleep, Sloane realized that her carefully constructed defenses were crumbling. Seeing Maxwell with the twins, so natural in his role as a father, was stirring emotions she thought she had buried long ago. They need us, Maxwell said softly, as if reading her thoughts. Not just separately, but together. Sloane knew he was right, but fear still paralyzed her. Trusting Maxwell again meant risking his heart once again. The question was she ready to take that risk? The rising Manhattan sun poured its golden light through the windows of the Four Seasons suite, finding Maxwell asleep in an armchair next to Hunter's bed. During the night, he had taken turns with Sloane to monitor her son's fever, a routine familiar to her but completely new to him. Sloane watched him silently from the doorway, her heart torn between gratitude for his presence and fear of the emotions his proximity aroused. Hunter had improved considerably overnight, but Maxwell had insisted on staying, determined to make up for 5 years of absence in a single night. "You're staring," Maxwell murmured without opening his eyes, a small smile playing on his lips. "Just checking to make sure you didn't run away during the night," she replied, trying to keep her tone light, but failing to completely hide the old hurt. His eyes opened, meeting hers with intensity. "I'm not going anywhere, Sloane. Never again." The moment was interrupted by Rachel, who silently entered with a breakfast tray. "Good morning. Harper is having coffee with Claire in the hotel restaurant. I thought you two needed a moment to talk." After Rachel left, Sloane and Maxwell sat in the adjoining room, where they could talk without disturbing Hunter's sleep. The aroma of the hotel's premium coffee filled the air, but neither of them touched the cups. "I spent the night going through the files you gave me," Maxwell began, his voice controlled but strained. "It's worse than we imagined. Victoria didn't just manipulate the photos and buy off the investigators. She was selling trade secrets to Morrison Technologies for years. And using my image to divert attention from their activities," Sloane added. "The photos were just the icing on the cake. She needed a scapegoat when things started to fall apart. Why didn't you come straight to me with this information when you discovered it?" Sloane laughed humorlessly. "And would you have believed me? The Maxwell Westwick who kicked me out that night wasn't exactly known for his listening skills." "People change, Sloane," he replied softly. "I've changed. That night, losing you, was my biggest regret." "It wasn't just you who lost something that night," she whispered, her hands unconsciously resting on her belly, remembering the lonely pregnancy she faced. Maxwell stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The city below began its daily ritual, oblivious to the drama unfolding so many floors above. "I want to make a public announcement," he declared, "about the kids, about Victoria, about everything." "No," Sloane replied firmly. "I'm not going to expose our children to the media like that. They're Westwicks, Sloane. Sooner or later the truth will come out. Wouldn't it be better if we controlled the narrative?" "And what narrative would that be, Maxwell? That the powerful CEO of Westwick Industries was deceived by his vice president? That he kicked out his pregnant wife without giving her a chance to defend herself? That he lost 5 years of his own children's lives out of pride and stubbornness?" The words hit Maxwell like physical blows. He turned to face her, his face a mask of pain and regret. "The truth, Sloane. All of it. Including the part where I was an idiot who almost destroyed his own family by not trusting the one person who was always honest with me." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with 5 years of unresolved hurt and unspoken truths. "Daddy?" Hunter's sleepy voice came from the bedroom. "Are you still here?" Maxwell took one last look at Sloane before heading to the bedroom. "Of course I am, champ. How are you feeling?" Sloane watched them interact, her heart sinking at the ease with which Maxwell assumed his paternal role. It was as if he had always been there, as if the last 5 years were just a nightmare that everyone had just woken up from. "I'm going to pick Harper up for coffee," she announced, needing a moment to compose herself. "Sloane," Maxwell called before she reached the door, "we're not done with this conversation." She nodded without turning around, knowing he was right. There was much more to be said, much more to be resolved. But for now, seeing Hunter smiling at the father he had just met was enough to make her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. In the elevator, Sloane allowed a single tear to escape. 5 years ago, she had left the Westwick mansion determined to never again allow Maxwell to have power over her heart. Now, watching him with the children, she realized that perhaps this power had never really diminished. The question was, Was she ready to risk her heart again for a second chance at the family she always dreamed of having? And more importantly, was Maxwell really changed enough to deserve this chance? When Harper saw Sloane in the hotel restaurant, he dropped his half-eaten waffle and ran over to hug her. "Mum, how's Hunter? Is he still sick?" "He's better, honey," Sloane replied, stroking her daughter's dark hair. "His father is with him now." Claire, the nanny Rachel had hired to help during her stay in New York, smiled when she saw the interaction. "Harper has been an excellent sister, worrying about Hunter all the time." "They've always been like this," Sloane commented, sitting down at the table. "Inseparable since birth." His phone buzzed with a message from his chief financial officer. Morrison Technologies had made a surprise acquisition offer for Nova Genesis. The timing couldn't be more suspicious. "Claire, can you take Harper to see his brother? I need to take care of some work things." Once she was alone, Sloane called her lawyer. "Sam, I need you to review all the documents on Victoria Bennett and James Morrison. Something is going on." "I've been waiting for your call," Sam replied. "The takeover offer came across all the board tables this morning. It's aggressive." "It's obviously retaliation," Sloane concluded. "Victoria must have discovered that Maxwell has the evidence." "Speaking of Maxwell Westwick," Sam hesitated. "The paternity papers arrived at the office. He wasted no time." Sloane closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pressure on her temples. "We'll deal with that later. Now I need to understand what Victoria and Morrison are planning." Returning to the suite, Sloane found a scene that made her heart stop. Maxwell sitting on the floor between the twins, assembling a small electronic circuit while explaining each component. Hunter, still in his pajamas, but visibly better, watched in fascination as Harper asked insightful questions about every detail. "Morrison Technologies has made a bid for Nova Genesis," Sloane announced without preamble. Maxwell raised his head sharply, his eyes meeting hers. "When?" "This morning. Too aggressive to be a coincidence." "Kids," Maxwell addressed the twins, "how about you watch some TV while I talk to your mum?" After the children were settled in the living room, Maxwell led Sloane to the suite's study. "Victoria is trying to pressure you." "Not just that," Sloane replied, pulling out her tablet. "Look at the bid numbers. They're too specific, like they know exactly how much they need to offer to tempt the board." Maxwell looked over the data, his expression darkening. "Someone on your council is leaking information." "Just like what happened at Westwick Industries 5 years ago," Sloane agreed. "The pattern is the same." "We need to act fast," Maxwell declared, already pulling out his phone. "Can I have my security team?" "No," Sloane interrupted. "This is my company, Maxwell. I don't need you to fight my battles." "I'm not trying to fight your battles," he replied, his voice softening. "I'm offering a partnership, as it should have been from the beginning." The look they exchanged was loaded with meaning. 5 years ago, they had been an unstoppable force together, both in business and in their personal lives, until distrust destroyed everything. "A partnership," Sloane repeated slowly. "And how exactly would that work?" Westwick Industries could make a counteroffer, not a hostile takeover but a strategic merger. Nova Genesis would maintain its autonomy, but we would have combined resources to take on Morrison and Victoria. "What about the children? How would that affect our arrangement with them?" Maxwell approached, his presence sending familiar shivers down Sloane's spine. "They would have their parents working together, building something meaningful. Isn't that what we always wanted?" "What we wanted wasn't always what we got," Sloane replied softly. An excited scream from the room interrupted the moment. Harper had managed to get the little circuit working on her own, and her face beamed with pride. "Look!" she exclaimed as her parents entered the room. "I did just like you taught me, Dad." Maxwell's smile was radiant. "That's amazing, Princess. You have a natural talent for engineering." Sloane watched the interaction, feeling her defenses begin to crack. The ease with which Maxwell fit into the twins' lives, the natural way they accepted him, was stirring his deepest convictions. "Okay," she finally said, "we will explore this idea of partnership, but with clear conditions and well-defined limits." "Always the negotiator," Maxwell smiled, but her eyes were serious. I agree to your conditions. And Sloane, this time, I promise to listen. Really listen. The rest of the morning was spent video conferences with lawyers and executives, while the twins played under Claire's watchful care. With each passing hour, Sloane felt the weight of her decisions. She was not only defining the future of her company, but potentially redrawing her family's map. The question that was going through his mind was, would it be possible to rebuild trust after so much time and so much heartache, or do some bridges, once broken, remain irreparable? Watching Maxwell with the children, Sloane began to suspect that perhaps some bridges had never really been broken. They just needed to be rebuilt. The afternoon was falling over Manhattan when Victoria Bennett entered James Morrison's luxurious office on Madison Avenue. Her impeccable Chanel suit contrasted with her tense expression as she observed the city through the windows on the 40th floor. "Maxwell has the proof," she announced without preamble, "and that bitch Sloane is back, with 2 little Westwicks in tow." James Morrison swiveled in his Italian leather chair, his cold eyes calculating the implications. "The twins complicate things. The bid for New Genesis. It's already been sent, but I know Maxwell. He's not going to let his ex-wife's company fall into our hands without a fight." "Ex-wife because of you," James smiled sardonically. "Your plan worked perfectly 5 years ago. Maybe you just need to refine your approach." At the Four Seasons, oblivious to the brewing conspiracy, Maxwell and Sloane worked side by side to counterattack the hostile bid. The presidential suite had been transformed into a makeshift office with laptops and documents scattered across the dining table while the twins played in the adjoining bedroom. "Councilman Philip Andrews," Sloane pointed to a name on her tablet. "He has been acting strangely in recent meetings, always pushing for financial information that would not normally be relevant to his position." Maxwell leaned in to see the screen, his familiar scent making Sloane catch her breath momentarily. "Andrews? He worked for Morrison Technologies 10 years ago. Could be our connection." "Mommy?" Harper appeared in the doorway, holding his educational tablet. "Can I show you something?" Sloane motioned for her daughter to come closer, grateful for the break in the tension building between her and Maxwell. Harper slid between the two, her blue eyes sparkling with excitement. "I drew a picture of our family," she explained, showing a surprisingly well-done digital illustration for a 5-year-old. "See? It's the 4 of us together." The silence that followed was heavy. In the drawing, Harper had portrayed his ideal family, the 4 of them holding hands, smiling, united. It was an innocent sight that made Sloane's heart sink. "It's beautiful, Princess," Maxwell praised, his voice slightly cracking. "You have a lot of talent." "Can we really be like this?" Harper asked, looking hopefully between her parents. "Like other families." Sloane felt tears threatening to fall. "Harper, honey, sometimes things are more complicated." "Why?" The child's simple question carried the weight of 5 years of separation. "If we love each other, why can't we be together?" Maxwell gently touched Sloane's shoulder. "Why don't you take the drawing to show Hunter? I'm sure he'll love it." After Harper left, the silence between them became almost tangible. "She's right, you know," Maxwell finally said. "Why are we making things so complicated?" "Because life is not a children's cartoon, Maxwell," Sloane replied, but her voice betrayed her own uncertainty. "We can't just erase 5 years of history." "I'm not suggesting we delete anything." He stepped closer, his intense eyes boring into hers. "I'm suggesting we build something new, something better." Sloane's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Sam, his lawyer. "We have a problem. Andrews has just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. He's trying to force a vote on Morrison's offer." "He can't do this without my consent," Sloane protested. "It can, if it has enough support from the board, and from what I'm hearing, it does." Maxwell, who had been following the conversation, was already typing on his phone. "I can have my legal team ready in an hour. We can file a preliminary injunction." "No," Sloane interrupted, an idea forming in her mind. "Let them think they won. I have a better plan." After hanging up, she turned to Maxwell. "How much do you trust me?" "Completely. he replied without hesitation, surprising her with his conviction. Even after everything? Especially after everything, Maxwell smiled slightly. You built an empire from scratch while raising our children alone. If there's anyone I trust to defeat Victoria and Morrison, it's you. Sloane felt something inside her melt at those words. It was the kind of trust she'd always wanted from him, the kind of trust that could have saved her marriage 5 years ago. Then follow me on this, she began to explain her plan, watching Maxwell's eyes widen with every detail. It's risky, he commented when she finished, but brilliant, as always. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the apartment, reminding them of what was really at stake. It wasn't just about companies or revenge. It was about building a secure future for those 2 children who, despite everything, never gave up hope of seeing their family together. For them, Sloane said softly. For all of us, Maxwell finished, his hand finding hers on the table. And for the first time in 5 years, Sloane didn't withdraw her hand. The morning of the board meeting dawned over Manhattan as Sloane adjusted her black blazer in front of the mirror. His eyes caught the reflection of Maxwell, who was watching the twins eating breakfast in the adjacent room of the suite. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low so as not to alert the children. "Once we start, there's no going back." "Victoria and Morrison destroyed our lives once," Sloane replied, turning to face him. "I won't let them do that again." The plan was audacious. Let Andrews think he had won. Let him present the Morrison Technologies proposal to the board. Meanwhile, Maxwell had spent the night mobilizing strategic allies and preparing evidence that would not only destroy Victoria's reputation, but also reveal the extensive network of corruption within Morrison Technologies. "Rachel is here to stay with the kids," Maxwell reported, checking her phone. "Sam confirms all documents are ready." Sloane approached the twins, her heart sinking at the sight of Hunter and Harper so engrossed in their morning routine, oblivious to the battle that was about to take place. "Mummy has a very important meeting today," she explained, adjusting the bow in Harper's hair. "But Rachel is going to take you to the Natural History Museum. And then—" "Father is going too?" Hunter interrupted, his blue eyes, so much like Maxwell's, shining with expectation. "Not this time, champ," Maxwell replied, crouching down to his son's level, "but I promise we'll do something special tonight, the 4 of us together." Harper's hopeful smile made something inside Sloane twitch. His children were already so attached to their father, even after just a few days. What would it be like when this was all over? In the elevator going down to the lobby, Maxwell broke the tense silence. "No matter what happens today, Sloane, know that—" "No," she interrupted him gently. "Don't say anything now. We need to stay focused." Nova Genesis's Manhattan headquarters occupied 3 floors of a modern building in Midtown. When Sloane and Maxwell entered the meeting room, Andrews was already there, along with other board members. His confident expression faltered momentarily upon seeing Maxwell. "Mr. Westwick," he greeted, trying to maintain his composure. "We didn't expect you to be there today." "Obviously," Maxwell replied with a cold smile, "but considering we are discussing the future of the company my children will one day inherit, I thought it appropriate to participate." The buzz that went through the room was instantaneous. Some councillors who had not been at the gala exchanged surprised looks at the mention of the Westwick heirs. Victoria and James Morrison arrived moments later, stopping abruptly when they saw Maxwell standing next to Sloane. Victoria's smile froze on her perfectly made-up face. "What an interesting meeting," she commented, sitting down on the opposite side of the table. "So many familiar faces." "Some more familiar than others," Sloane replied calmly, opening her laptop. "Shall we begin?" Andrews began his presentation on the Morrison Technologies proposal, his voice betraying nervousness as he explained the terms of the acquisition. At his side, Morrison occasionally chimed in with comments about synergy and added value. Sloane let them speak, watching the councillors' expressions. Some seemed genuinely interested, others clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "And so," Morrison concluded with a satisfied smile, "we believe this offer represents the best option for the future of New Genesis." "Interesting," Sloane finally said, standing up. especially considering this same strategy was used 5 years ago in an attempt to take control of Westwick Industries. Victoria's face paled visibly. Morrison fidgeted in his seat. "I don't know what you're talking about," Victoria began, but Maxwell interrupted her. "I think you do, Victoria," he said, projecting a series of documents onto the room's screen. "Just like you know about the emails you exchanged with Morrison in 2018, planning my separation from Sloane, or about the bank transfers to the investigators who faked the photos." "This is ridiculous," Morrison protested, but his voice cracked when Sloane began to play a recording. It was Victoria's voice, clear and unmistakable, arguing with Morrison about how to use Sloane's pregnancy, which she had discovered before anyone else, to manipulate the situation. "Pregnant?" one of the senior advisors exclaimed, looking at Sloane in shock. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice firm. "I was expecting twins when I was kicked out of Westwick Manor. Twins who are now 5 years old and who, thanks to Victoria and Morrison's plan, grew up without knowing their father." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stood up abruptly, but security guards were already blocking the room's exits. "You can't prove anything," she hissed, but the fear in her eyes was evident. "Actually," Maxwell interjected, "we can prove everything. Every email, every transfer, every conspiracy. The question now is, how much are you willing to lose before you confess?" Morrison was the first to break. In a matter of minutes, he began detailing the entire scheme, throwing Victoria under the bus while trying to save his own skin. When the police arrived to escort Victoria and Morrison, Sloane felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. 5 years of planning culminating in less than 2 hours of confrontation. "The council is suspended until further notice," she announced. "Internal investigations will be conducted at all levels." As the councillors left in shock, Maxwell approached Sloane. "You were amazing." "We were," she corrected softly. Maybe some partnerships really are destined to work out." The look they exchanged carried the weight of 5 years of separation and the promise of a future that, for the first time, seemed possible. "How about we go get our kids?" Maxwell suggested, holding out his hand. "I think we have a special night promise to keep." Sloane hesitated only for a moment before accepting his hand. Sometimes he realized the greatest victories are not just about defeating enemies, but about finding the courage to rebuild what was broken. The Natural History Museum was buzzing with typical Thursday afternoon energy when Maxwell and Sloane found the twins in the dinosaur section. Hunter was excitedly explaining Tyrannosaurus Rex to Rachel, using surprisingly technical terms for a 5-year-old. And then the T-Rex used its sharp teeth to... Hunter stopped mid-sentence when he saw his parents, his face instantly lighting up. "Did you guys catch the bad guys?" Sloane and Maxwell exchanged surprised looks. "How do you know about this, darling?" "I heard you and Dad talking last night," Harper interjected, swinging her little legs from the bench she was sitting on, "about the bad people who hurt our family." Sloane's heart sank. Of course the children had noticed. They were always extraordinarily perceptive. "Yes," Maxwell replied, crouching down to his children's height. "People who did wrong things will no longer be able to hurt our family." "So, can we be a real family now?" Harper asked, her blue eyes full of hope. Sloane felt Maxwell tense beside her. It was a question that she herself had been avoiding for the last few days. "How about we go to that special dinner I promised?" Maxwell suggested, deftly deflecting the thorny subject. "I heard about this amazing place in Brooklyn that serves the best milkshakes in town." The change of subject worked like magic, with the twins immediately embarking on a lively discussion about ice cream flavors. Rachel discreetly said goodbye, leaving the family to head to Brooklyn in one of Maxwell's limousines. River Cafe, with its stunning views of the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan skyline, provided the perfect setting for an evening that seemed straight out of one of Harper's hopeful cartoons. The twins, impeccable in their little dinner attire, carried themselves with a maturity that often surprised strangers. "They're extraordinary," Maxwell commented quietly, as he watched Hunter explain to Harper why the Empire State Building seemed to change color. You did an amazing job, Sloane. They are extraordinary in their own right, she replied, playing with her napkin. Sometimes I wonder if they inherited the best of both of us, their analytical intelligence, my determination, and clearly our shared stubbornness, Maxwell added with a soft smile. The dinner took place in an almost surreal bubble of domestic normality. To any outside observer, they would appear to be just another happy family celebrating something special. "Dad," Hunter called as he attacked his dessert, "are you going back to Los Angeles now that you caught the bad guys?" The innocent question fell like a bomb on the table. Maxwell placed his dessert spoon carefully on the napkin. "Actually," he began, casting a hesitant glance at Sloane, "I was thinking about staying in New York for a while. Maybe even looking for a more permanent place here." "In Manhattan?" Harper asked excitedly. "Or maybe San Francisco?" Maxwell continued, his eyes fixed on Sloane. "Closer to you." The silence that followed was filled with unspoken possibilities. Sloane felt her heart quicken at the implications of Maxwell's suggestion. "The children have school," she began cautiously. "Your lives, your friends." "And I missed 5 years of those lives," Maxwell replied softly. "I don't want to waste another day." The twins watched their parents' interaction with barely concealed interest, their heads moving from one to the other like a tennis match. "Westwick Industries is headquartered in San Francisco," Maxwell continued. "With the new Genesis fusion, it makes sense." "Maxwell," Sloane interrupted gently, aware of her children's hopeful looks. "Can we discuss this later?" He nodded, understanding that some conversations needed to happen away from the children's listening ears. Later, after the twins finally fell asleep in their hotel suite, exhausted but happy, Sloane found Maxwell on the balcony, looking out over the illuminated city. "Are you serious about San Francisco?" she asked, stopping next to him. "I've never been so serious in my life," he replied without looking away from the landscape. "These last few days with you and the kids made me realize how empty I was before." "Things can't just go back to the way they were," Sloane warned, though her voice betrayed her own uncertainty. "I don't want them to come back." Maxwell turned to face her. "I want to build something new, something better, with lessons learned and truths faced." The night wind played with Sloane's hair as she absorbed his words. 5 years ago, she had fled Beverly Hills, vowing never to trust Maxwell Westwick again. Now, watching the man he had become, the devoted father he was striving to be, she wondered if perhaps some oaths were made to be broken. "One step at a time," she finally replied, her voice little more than a whisper. Maxwell smiled, that smile that still had the power to make your heart skip a beat. "One step at a time," he agreed, holding out his hand. And there, under the lights of Manhattan, Sloane allowed herself to take the first step toward a future that, just a few weeks ago, she would have considered impossible. Sloane's office at Nova Genesis in San Francisco looked different that Monday morning. 2 weeks had passed since the events in New York, and the absence of the twins, who were on their first morning back at school, created a silence she had not yet gotten used to. His phone buzzed with a message from Maxwell. "Hunter left his favorite tablet at the Four Seasons. I've already arranged for it to be shipped today." Sloane smiled involuntarily. Over the past 2 weeks, Maxwell had been incredibly attentive to the smallest details of his children's lives, as if trying to make up for every lost second of the past 5 years. "Miss Harrison," his assistant interrupted his thoughts. "The Westwick Industries transition team has arrived for the meeting." The merger between the companies was progressing faster than expected. With Victoria and Morrison facing criminal charges, the market has reacted positively to the union of the two technology powerhouses. "Good morning, everyone," Sloane greeted as she entered the conference room. Maxwell's team was efficient and professional, but she couldn't help but notice how everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells around her, aware of the complexity of their relationship with the CEO. "The San Francisco contracts are ready for review," said Diana Chen, Westwick's principal corporate attorney. Mr. Westwick has already signed the preliminary paperwork." Sloane leafed through the documents, her attention caught by a specific detail. "Is he really moving his main headquarters to San Francisco?" "Yes," Diana confirmed. "The decision was announced to the board this morning. The mansion in Beverly Hills is now for sale." The weight of this information hit Sloane like a wave. Maxwell wasn't just talking about change, he was actually restructuring his entire life to be closer to his children. The meeting continued with discussions about systems integration and personnel relocation, but Sloane's mind wandered to the last conversation she had had with Maxwell before they left New York. "I'm not asking us to go back to the way we were," he had said, his intense blue eyes fixed on hers. "I'm asking for a chance to be something better." A tap on her phone brought her back to the present, a photo sent by the twins' teacher. Harper was presenting his science project to the class, a small robot similar to the one they had built with Maxwell in New York. The proud smile on her daughter's face made her heart sink. "Miss Harrison?" Diana called her softly. "About your new position as co-CEO. Can we discuss this later?" Sloane interrupted, standing up. "I have an important appointment now." 20 minutes later, his Audi parked in front of Pacific Heights Elementary School, where the twins attended school. Through the classroom windows, I could see Harper still engaged in her presentation, gesturing excitedly as she explained her project. "She's amazing," a familiar voice commented from beside her. Maxwell was leaning against his own car, watching the same scene. "Like you." "Harper messaged me about the performance," he explained with a small smile. "Some things are more important than board meetings." Sloane felt something melt inside her. This Maxwell, the devoted father who would skip important commitments to watch his daughter's school performance, was so different from the man who had thrown her out of the house 5 years ago. "You're really selling the mansion," she commented, not as a question. "That place holds too many memories," he replied, his gaze still fixed on the classroom. "Some good, some not so much. I think we all deserve a fresh start." The bell rang, and soon the children began to leave the classrooms. Hunter was the first to spot them, his blue eyes identical to his father's, widening in surprise and joy. "Mom! Dad!" He ran towards her, closely followed by Harper. "Did you guys see my sister? She was amazing." "We did, champ." Maxwell smiled, picking up his son as Harper threw herself into Sloane's arms. "How about we celebrate with a special lunch?" "Ghirardelli Square?" Harper suggested hopefully, making both parents laugh. The girl's obsession with chocolate from the famous San Francisco confectionery was well known. "Why not?" Sloane agreed, surprising herself. Normally, she would be more strict with schedules and routines, but something was changing. Maybe it was the twins' smiles, or the way Maxwell looked at her, as if she was something precious that he was afraid of losing again. As they walked together down the sidewalk, the twins between them chatting animatedly about their days at school, Sloane allowed herself to imagine a future different from the one she had planned, a future where old hurts could be healed, where second chances were not only possible, but welcomed. "One step at a time," she murmured to herself, echoing her own words from that night in New York. Maxwell glanced at her sideways, having heard her whisper. His smile was soft, understanding, as if he understood exactly what she was thinking. And maybe he did understand. After all, they were always good at reading each other. It was what made them so formidable together, both in business and in their personal lives. The question now was, were they ready to trust that connection again? Autumn in San Francisco painted the streets with golden hues as Sloane organized documents in their new joint office at the newly opened Westwick Genesis headquarters. 3 months had passed since the events in New York, and the merger of the companies was progressing with an efficiency that surprised even the most skeptical analysts. "The third quarter reports are in," Maxwell announced, entering the room with a folder in hand. He had settled into a house in Pacific Heights, just a few blocks from where Sloane lived with the twins. The projections exceeded all expectations. "Of course I do," Sloane replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "We've always been unbeatable together. Professionally speaking." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. Over the past few weeks, their dynamic had transformed into something neither of them dared define. No longer bitter ex-spouses, but not completely reconciled either. Hunter asked me for help with a science project. Maxwell changed the subject, sitting in the chair in front of her desk. Something about renewable energy. Our son is determined to save the planet before he's 6. Our son, Sloane repeated softly. The ease with which these words now flowed between them still surprised her. Harper isn't far behind either. She drew up plans for a recycling robot last night. About that, Maxwell hesitated momentarily. I was thinking about taking the kids camping this weekend. There's an amazing place in Yosemite, if you're okay with that, of course. Sloane looked up from the documents she was pretending to read. Camping? You? People change, Sloane, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. Plus, I've read that outdoor experiences are important for children's development. You've been reading a lot about child development lately, she observed. I'm trying to make up for lost time, Maxwell admitted. I know I can't make up for the 5 years I lost, but I can make sure every moment from now on counts. The silence that followed was interrupted by a knock on the door. Diana Chen filed more documents that required the signatures of both CEOs. By the way, Diana commented as she organized the papers, the press is speculating about the status of your relationship. The PR department needs an official statement. Our status? Sloane felt her heart speed up. We are business partners and parents to the twins. End of story. The look Maxwell gave him was indescribable. Is this what we are? Diana discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone with the question that hung in the air. Maxwell, Sloane began, but was interrupted by the ringing of her phone. It was the twins' school. Mrs. Harrison? Harper had a little accident during recess. Nothing serious, but she's asking for her parents. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the school nurse's office together, where they found Harper sitting in a chair, holding an ice pack against her scraped knee. Hunter was at her side, holding her free hand. Mom! Dad! Harper smiled through her tears. I was showing Hunter how a robot astronaut would move on Mars, but I forgot it wasn't actually in zero gravity. Maxwell stifled a laugh as he knelt to examine the wound. Well, future astronaut, it looks like you're going to survive. But it still hurts, she pouted. Can you guys take me home? Sloane and Maxwell exchanged glances. There were important meetings awaiting both of them, but... Of course we can, Princess, Maxwell replied without hesitation. How about a family movie day? At your house? Hunter asked hopefully. You have that giant TV. Actually, Sloane surprised everyone, including herself, we can do this in our house. There's more room for everyone. The smile that lit up Maxwell's face made his heart skip a beat. Hours later, with the twins asleep on the couch between them and the credits for Wall-E rolling on the TV, Sloane allowed herself to watch the scene. It felt so natural, so right, as if the last 5 years were just a nightmare they had finally woken up from. About your question earlier, she began softly, about what we are. We don't need to define it now, Maxwell replied, his eyes fixed on his children's sleeping faces. Like you said, one step at a time. What if... Sloane hesitated, gathering her courage. What if I'm ready to take a few more steps? Maxwell turned to face her, his blue eyes intense in the twilight of the room. Then I will be here, ready to walk beside you, as I always should have been. In that moment, watching the man who had been her first love, her greatest regret, and now, possibly, her second chance, Sloane realized that some stories don't really end. They just pause before beginning a new chapter. And maybe, just maybe, this new chapter would be better than the last. Autumn gave way to winter in San Francisco, bringing with it a characteristic fog that enveloped the city like a silver blanket. From the rooftop of the new Westwick Genesis building, Sloane watched the Golden Gate Bridge partially hidden by fog as she waited for the most important meeting of her life to begin. It wasn't a business meeting, although the location might suggest that. It was a familiar conversation, the first since she and Maxwell had decided 2 weeks ago that it was time to seriously discuss the future. Mommy! Harper's voice brought her back to the present. Her daughter looked exceptionally elegant in a navy blue dress that matched her eyes. Father said he has a surprise for us. Yes, it does, Sloane smiled, adjusting a wild curl in her daughter's hair. But first we need to wait for your brother to finish setting up that new program your father installed. As if summoned, Hunter emerged from the adjacent technology room, his face lit up with the kind of excitement that only a 5-year-old discovering new computer codes could display. I managed to make it work, he announced proudly. The robot can now dance. Impressive, Maxwell's voice sounded from the door, making everyone turn around. He carried a familiar folder, the same one Sloane had seen him holding the day he found out about the twins. But today, I have something even more special to show you. The twins settled onto the couch between their parents, their expressions a mix of curiosity and expectation. Maxwell opened the folder, revealing a series of architectural plans. Remember when we talked about finding a new place for all of us? He began softly. Well, I found this land in Sausalito. Bayview, plenty of room for a robotics lab. For all of us? Hunter interrupted, his eyes wide. You mean all together? If your mother agrees, Maxwell replied, his gaze meeting Sloane's. And if you want, of course. Harper jumped off the couch, rushing to examine the plants more closely. Look, Hunter, there's a space-marked twins laboratory. Sloane felt her heart quicken as she saw the sparkle in her children's eyes. In the last few weeks, since that movie night at their house, something had subtly changed in their family dynamic. Sunday lunches became a ritual, as did science project nights and breakfast mornings before school. We don't need to decide now, Maxwell assured, noting her hesitation. As we always say, one step at a time. Actually, Sloane found herself saying, I think we've already taken a lot of small steps. Maybe it's time for a bigger leap. The smile that lit up Maxwell's face made the last vestiges of his doubts dissolve. This was no longer the man who had thrown her out of the house one stormy night. This was a man who had learned from his mistakes, who had grown through the pain of separation as much as she had. Does this mean we're all going to live together? Harper asked, her voice brimming with hope. It means we're going to try, Sloane answered honestly, like a family. As we always should have been, Maxwell finished softly. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Between board meetings and site visits in Sausalito, Sloane watched as her life was transforming in ways she never imagined possible 6 months ago. The Beverly Hills mansion has been sold, its ghosts finally exorcised. Victoria and Morrison faced criminal prosecution, their attempts at manipulation exposed to the corporate world. But more important than any revenge or justice was the joy on the twins' faces as they spent time with both their parents. On a particularly clear afternoon, as they supervised the initial construction of the house in Sausalito, Maxwell found Sloane gazing out across the bay. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, stopping next to you. "I was thinking about how life takes turns," she replied, watching Hunter and Harper playing with a drone that Maxwell had purchased for educational purposes. 6 months ago, I had a meticulous plan for revenge. Now I realize that sometimes the best plans are the ones that life makes for us. Maxwell intertwined his fingers with hers, a gesture that had become increasingly natural in recent weeks. Do you know what else I've learned over the years? That some people come into our lives to teach us lessons, others to test us, but some are destined to stay, no matter how many detours the path presents. Sloane looked at her children, now trying to convince Claire, who was still an occasional babysitter, to try controlling the drone. They never doubted it, you know. From the first moment they met you, they just accepted it, as if they knew something that took us both years to understand. That some love stories don't really end, Maxwell added. They just need a new beginning. The sun was beginning to set over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was the kind of moment that, years ago, Sloane would have considered too cliché to be real. Now she understood that sometimes clichés existed for a reason. A new beginning, she repeated, lightly squeezing Maxwell's hand. I think I can live with that. His smile was as bright as the sunset. Just promise one thing." "What?" "Next time I do something stupidly stubborn, make me listen before you go out in the rain." Sloane laughed, a free and genuine sound that made the twins look her way with identical smiles. "I promise. But you also have to promise to always trust me first, before you trust anyone else." "Deal." Maxwell sealed the deal with a soft kiss, eliciting dramatic "eus" from the twins. And there, with the sun setting over the bay and the sound of her children's laughter in the background, Sloane Harrison Westwick finally understood that sometimes the true happy ending isn't the one we plan, but the one we find when we're brave enough to give love a second chance.